On the last Sunday of June, we began a series that I entitled, Who is This Church? That Sunday, we answered the question based on the first three verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, which we just read from. And we got three answers: that the church, we may be faulty, but we are still God's chosen people. We got a second answer to the question, who is this church? We said we may be informed about many things, but we can't afford to be deficient in spiritual things. And a third answer was, we may have never been pagans, but we are always under the threat of being led away by something other than God. On the first Sunday of July, when we tried on the 3rd of July to straddle between church and country, we made a statement about we, the people. And then we used the 5th chapter of Acts of the Apostles, that story of Ananias and Sapphira. And we affirmed three more things about the church. That one, we have a unity. We, the people, both in church and country, we have a unity that is provided. Then we affirm, secondly, that we have a unity that must be projected. And thirdly, we have a unity that must be protected. On July 10, we came back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and from verses 4 through 6, we asked ourselves another question: what's in our wallet? And the answers came that the church is endowed with charisma, that the church is equipped for service, that the church is energized with power, and that the church is enveloped within the Trinity. On July 17th, we went to verses 7 through 11, again, of 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we affirmed that the church shares a unique commonality, wherein every member possesses the validation of the Spirit, wherein every member shares the variety of the Spirit's gifts, wherein we share an interconnectedness, wherein we share an interdependence, and wherein we share a common intelligence. And then last Sunday, we went to verses 12 through 20. Never mind, Vince tried to get us elsewhere, but we got to verses 12. Hey, I had to pick on you this morning. I told our worship leader that if anything goes wrong this morning, all we do is laugh and you will never know that it went wrong. Last week we looked at the narrowness of unity. Not that unity has no space for more people, and God's intended idea of creation is that there's room for all. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish. For God so loved the whole world. So the narrowness of unity is not about its capacity for more, but it is about its attitudes, that it disallows certain attitudes, that there is no room for uniformity. God loves diversity because God created it. There is no room for disparity. All of us share the Spirit. There is no room for inferiority. The foot cannot say to the hand, because I can't do all these marvelous things you do, I am useless. There is no room for superiority. The eye cannot say to another part of the body, hey, you can't see all these beautiful people in the sanctuary, so you're useless. There is no room for partiality, because Paul ends that part of his thoughts with the idea that it is God who, in God's own wisdom, who determines how God will distribute God's gifts. No partiality. So the questions today, as we embark on this final installment in this series, are this. For what is all this spirituality? For what is all this unity? For what is all this energy? And for what is all this connectivity? These four things that have rung loudly throughout the whole series. Spirituality. I would not have you ignorant is the way Paul opens that 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians. And the church at Corinth was having a massive spiritual problem. The church is nothing without spirituality. The church is nothing without unity. The church is nothing without energy, the energy of the Spirit. And the church is nothing without the connectivity of the people of God harnessed together. For my yoke is easy, Jesus says, and the yoke is not a burden, but the yoke is an instrument that harnesses Jesus to you. We're connected together. For what is all of this? The answer is that for whatever else they are, as the title of today's sermon states, they are for ensuring the church's health, ensuring congregational health. Two things here, and then I'll be done. And I think I will be done before 11. As the church, we are required to be counter-cultural. The saddest thing about America today is that the church has become the culture rather than set the pattern of what the culture ought to be. And now I don't mean that the church must become imperialist and impose upon everybody else like some people are seeking to do in the name of Jesus, which Jesus never ever did. Jesus invited people, and they were free to walk away from him, as they sometimes did. He never badgered anybody. He never imposed himself upon anybody. He never imposed his will upon anybody. But he set a culture in place. Whosoever will may come. The saddest thing about America today is people who corrupt religion, corrupt law, and corrupt power to impose some corrupt form of religion, some corrupt version of Jesus upon everybody else. And then dare to say that religion is under attack, religious freedom. No! Religious freedom is not under attack unless you're talking about anybody who doesn't subscribe to some backward, rightward, far rightward nonsense that they call Christianity. But let me get back to the text. As the church, we are required to be countercultural. That is how we remain healthy. And the church in America today, generally speaking, is not healthy. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, and you are among them. You're allowed to clap, not just at the end of a sermon, but not just when the music is good, but when there's a point made about you. The Reverend Dr. Paul Hayes left a marvelous legacy here. And you ought not to be proud of yourselves, but you ought to be affirmed in the sense that you aren't like so many others are, following nonsense. The church in America is not healthy because, unlike Jesus, who said that power is not to rule over, so as soon as 6 people get on the Supreme Court, everything changes. Stare decisis goes to hell. The culture changes to favor narrowness. That's not Jesus. Jesus says power is to uplift. Power is to serve. The church is meant to be countercultural. Where do we find it in our text today? Well, look at verses 20 through 21. As it is, Paul says, there are many parts but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. We went there last week, but this is just to tee off. I don't want to use that today. This is just to kick off today. That in the world's culture, they thrive on pecking order. But in the church, by the way, welcome back, Marty. You should have come back a little bit darker looking like me, but in Africa for 3 weeks, welcome, I'm jealous still. In the church, we don't pursue pecking order. In the church, we dispense with superiority. We throw away inferiority. We don't deal with pecking order in the church. In the Baptist church, look, you might call me clergy, but in the Baptist tradition, strictly speaking, we have no denomination, we have no hierarchy, we really have no clergy either. We just have people gifted with training and with abilities and with given authority by you. In the church, we don't deal with pecking order. The church is required to be countercultural. So this thing about America first, it is counter to Jesus. The most powerful story that Jesus ever told was that of the one we call the story about the Good Samaritan. And who was the hero? In today's time, it would have been a Muslim. It would have been a Muslim. The Samaritan, a Muslim. While all the Christians with all the bishop titles and all the apostle titles and all the reverend doctor titles walked the other side. It was a Muslim who stopped to tend to a broken man. The church is required to be countercultural. In the world's culture, they thrive on marginalizing the weak. That's what they do. That's what Paul is dealing with from verses 22 and 23. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. In the world, don't you see it? They marginalize the weak. As soon as you miss a target, you get demoted or you're thrown away. As soon as you get to a certain age, they want to retire you, but not really retire you. They want to get you out without any benefits they could get away with. That's the world. As soon as the person you elect begins to, some other factors begin to happen and they begin to dip, you begin to get jittery and move back to, Jesus did say a dog returns to his own vomit. So, that's the world. But what's the culture in the church? In the church, we give special honor to the weak. We give special honor to the minority, just like Jesus did. Jesus was always in the crowd with all the adulation, and every time in the crowd, he would notice a little broken, marginalized, lonely somebody beyond the crowd. Didn't become beside himself with all the adulation and all the glory. He always saw somebody. That's the culture of the church. There's a reason I don't put deodorant on my face. There's a reason it goes to another part of my body. And you you can go further with that. But that's the point that Paul is making here about the human body, which he uses as a symbol of the church. There are parts of our natural, physical bodies that we treat in certain ways because, and you can add the because. That's the point he is making, that we treat in the church those who seem to be lesser, those who sweat more than others, those who smell more than others, those who create problems more than others, those who have problems more than others. Those are the ones, Paul says, that we focus our energies upon. Yes, there are some high maintenance people in church, but it's just that we are a little bit less high maintenance and we should serve them. In the world's culture, they also thrive on doing their own thing. But we in the church, we imitate the God thing. God has combined the members of the body, Paul says in verse 24, and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it. That's not what the world does. What the world does is that it finds people who have done the great thing and give them honor. Nowadays, there are some agencies that are pushing back against that. I'm getting tired of watching CNN because, just because. But they have a thing where they look for people, little people, strewn all over some backward parts of the world who are doing some marvelous things with very little. And they are giving them honor. That's the idea. That's not the world. That's something they're on to. We imitate what God does. That God gives greater honor to the lesser people. The church needs to come back to that. And one more little thing here. In the world's culture, they leave the suffering to suffer alone. So verse 26 says, in the body, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. Of course, the word knows that when one part is honored, every part rejoices with it, in the sense that if anybody won that multi-million, mega, whatever it is, thing last week, everybody would become a relative of that person who won it. But generally, the world, adopts a position of jealousy towards those who win something, or those who receive some kind of, that's not the culture of the church. So the church then should not mimic the world. Instead, it should model the Christ. The church, as the church, we are required to be counter-cultural. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its same old mold. As Paul writes to the Romans in chapter 12 and verse 1, he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Here's the second thing, and then I'll be done. As the church, we are required to be counter-cultural. That is how we remain healthy and ensure congregational health. As the church, number two, we are required, we must refuse. We must refuse to be counterproductive. We must refuse to be counterproductive. We are meant, created to be productive. And all I want to say here before I'm done is notice in the text how we can become counterproductive. So as you look at verses 28 through 30, and in the church God has appointed first of all apostles, second of prophets, third teachers, then workers of miracles, and so on and so forth. And then verse 29, are all apostles? Are all this? Are all one thing? Are all the other? No. There are differences. Here's the points I want to make. That we can become counterproductive when we try to be somebody else. So we have got to come to the place where we are satisfied with the gifts God has given us, identify joyfully with the place that God has put us, and use mightily whatever it is God has given us, and not look longingly at somebody else and wish we were like them, or wish we had what they had, or wish we could do what they could do. That's what Paul is saying. God has given every one of us certain abilities. Use it. Do not try to be somebody else. Are all apostles? No. Are all prophets? No. Do all work in certain ways? No. Do what God has given you to do. We can become counterproductive not only when we try to be someone else, but when we try to overlook somebody else. So we become self-important, and we begin to categorize the gifts and the people and say, these are better than these, and these are more useful than those, and this. No, we shouldn't do that, because we end up overlooking those whom we rank. And remember, we already said that in the church, in the world, they have pecking order, but not so in the church. Don't set up the church in a way that we begin to overlook others. We can become counterproductive when we undermine, and it becomes worse. We undermine, not just overlook, but undermine. We sabotage. And believe you me, I've seen it happen in church. Church people are very good at it. At least some, not all church people. And then we can become counterproductive when we try to disable someone else. We need to let people run. People ask me when they're interviewing me, what's your philosophy of ministry? What's your leadership style? And I say, I don't stand over people's shoulders. We clarify what our roles are, we clarify what our gifts are, we clarify what our work is, and we give people the elbow room to do their stuff. But commensurate with the wide berth we give people to work, we also require a wide amount of accountability. So we must not disable others by, clamping down on them and becoming miserable. The point is this, that we need each other, and that like an engine, or have you ever, opened up the back of your TV set? I had to do that the other day because with some big heavy weather that happened, a power surge protector failed, and 2 instruments went. And I paid a lot of money to fix one, and I kind of figured out what to do to fix the other one myself. And so I open up the back of the thing, and I'm seeing this. I'm not an electrician, so it looks so complex and so miserable to me. Every single little dot, every part, every fuse, every line, every transistor, whatever it is, everything just